Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. Another Sunday. I just wanted to, for those who might be new, uh, make sure you have a pair of headphones handy because at the end we'll be listening to a soundtrack with headphones. The major purpose of this is sort of a global mind link experience where we're using brainwave entrainment through headphones that synchronize the hemispheres and entrain everyone's brainwaves to the same state. With that level of precision of aligning consciousness of large groups of people, we have the possibility of causing a shift in the quantum field. And without getting too far down the rabbit hole of that idea, which we have discussed a number of times before, I suggest that everybody strap their seatbelts on for their mind because we're going to go into very weird and strange places today as we talk about dark matter and dark energy. Just be aware that for all intents and purposes, dark means invisible. It just means we don't have any instruments we can shine a light on it, so it's still dark. We can't measure it. We can only measure its effects on the small part of the physical universe that we can measure. It's very sort of similar to the sort of work that was going on at the California Institute for Human Science. Was when I was on the faculty there years ago. That was a research center, graduate school, and the concept of the research was to see if we could figure out how to use present scientific instrumentation to measure the unmeasurable. And the only possibility you have of doing that is to measure the effects of the invisible or the unmeasurable on the physical reality that we can make measurements of. So, for instance, part of those experiments was to measure the biophotonic emissions from the body itself, because the process of subatomic processes of being alive cause subatomic interactions which release photons as those interactions. So we have a baseline photon count of photons shining off of your body every second, 1 photon per second per centimeter squared all over your body. But at the 7 chakra areas, there's 100 to 1,000 times more photons coming off. So you can't measure the chakras directly, but you can measure their effect on subquantum fields that are liberating extra photons. And now all of a sudden, not only can you prove that there's something there, but you can measure the relative balance of the various chakras because of the photon count coming off of each one. So similar to that is how we would have to approach the measurement of, quote, dark energy and dark matter, things that we can't measure directly within any of the instrumentation that we've currently got. But we can see the effect on the physical reality that we can measure. Galaxies and nebulae and stars and all of that, cosmic background radiation, the gravity waves and all the rest that we can measure. We can see the influence of an invisible factor putting pressure and skewing the results that you would expect to have, which tells you something else is present exerting an influence, and you can't measure it, so you know it's there, and you can kind of flesh out its properties by its effect on the physical reality that you can measure. And that's pretty much where science is at right now. And it turns out that this concept of dark matter and dark energy makes up 95% of the universe. That 95% of everything that's out there that makes the substrate and the majority of the universe itself is something we can't see and we can't measure, which leaves only 5% off the top. That is all of this and everything that we see and all the galaxies and the star patterns and the nebulas and all of it is only 5% of what's there. 95%, we can't see it and we can't measure it. It's like sort of unbelievable, really. So it's just guesswork to figure it out. Back at the turn of the century, when the scientific community and astrophysics was attempting to figure out how is the universe put together and what are the laws that govern it, and there was this fresh new theory about the origin of the universe called the Big Bang theory, and doing the math of the Big Bang and extrapolating it forward was having problems. Not just problems, we're talking about big problems, big problems, which showed us that there's a big portion of what we're trying to say about how the universe is put together that is completely off and wrong. Pretty profound period of time. So in the classic picture of the Big Bang, where we have this instantaneous moment when everything instantly arrives on the scene in a titanic explosion from nothing. And in the first, picoseconds, this happens, and the first 10 to minus 32 seconds, that happens, and this and that, where they've put all these fancy schmancy words of cosmic inflation, and at a certain point, this Big Bang explosion, the explosion is, spreading out, and slowly starting to cool over hundreds of years and hundreds of millions of years and stuff like that, where we have in 1 second, at 100 seconds, particles are beginning to form. Within a year, ordinary matter particles are coupled to light, and dark matter particles start building structures. Of course, back then they didn't understand about dark matter. They're trying to figure this all out by themselves. Ordinary matter starts to coalesce. The whole system starts to cool. Things start to form. The first elementary particles could start to form. Hydrogen and helium. Atoms can start to form out of the cooled out mix that's happening. Eventually, it becomes possible for the coalition of the matter that's been cooling to collapse together into forms like stars. Stars go through a life cycle where they eventually burn out their fuel, and the gravity collapses them and they explode. And in those explosions is the formation of all the other elements of the periodic table, the heavy, quote, heavy elements. And that becomes the original basic foundation of where life could eventually, of organic life could eventually begin to form. So here we have ordinary matter particles fall into the structures created by dark matter, first stars and galaxies, blah, blah, on and on. And one thing that we see in this whole thing is that all of these stars and galaxies and nebulas and all the stuff that's out there uh, isn't just sort of out there. It's coalescing into highways and roadways and patterns. The massive 100,000 light year patterns of where the stars are coalescing into these lines, and the lines are forming these sort of amorphous patterns where you can see the original patterns are beginning to form, and they're becoming stronger and stronger until today we have these amazing sort of hypergalactic universal patterns of how the stars form along these coalesced highways. But from the original idea about where it all came from, and I've sort of discussed this before, the concept of the red shift, that it's like the Doppler effect when you're standing on the side of a road and an ambulance comes whizzing by. Its siren sounds higher in pitch, and then it gets lower in pitch as it goes by. Oh, right. Well, light does the same thing. As it's coming at you, it's blue, and as it passes by you and speeds away, it's red, the red shift. So when astronomers look out on the universe and they see that all the galaxies that you look at are shifted red, it means they're moving away from you. Not only every place you look 360 degrees around, every galaxy, every place in the universe is moving away from you, but they're all moving away from each other as well. So that means that everything in the universe is hyperdimensionally expanding. And the easiest way to visualize that is to draw a bunch of spiral galaxies on a balloon and blow that balloon up. You'll see that all of them are expanding away from each other across the balloon and on the surface of the balloon. So everything is expanding and moving away from each other. That's what they see in sort of this three-dimensional viewpoint of all the stars accelerating away. And when they measure that, they're sort of expecting that from the idea and the concept of the Big Bang, where you have this big explosion and everything starts sort of exploding out from that, right? And what was condensed here is getting less and less and less condensed as it goes out. And what was hot here is getting cooler and cooler and cooler. That's the kind of thing you would expect to happen. But when they measured the expansion was accelerating much faster than all of the math of that simple view of the Big Bang would predict. And that was sort of where everything was at back in these days, back at the turn of the century, where the numbers were not adding up and not aligning with, other basic things in the universe that would be there and you can measure, like the cosmic background radiation from that big explosion. And there's something called gravity waves, which I've discussed before, which are like, titanic ripples in space-time issuing forth not only from the Big Bang, but from black hole collisions and a bunch of other weird stuff where, if two galaxies collide, then ripples come out from that, like dropping a pebble in a pool of water. You see the ripples come out, except imagine that it's 3D, that the pebble is coming from a higher dimensional plane and striking our three-dimensional plane and causing a spherical ripple to come out. And the ripples are 100 million light years between crest to crest, and it's moving so slowly that eons would pass in our lifetimes, but it's moving just the same. You just speed the film up and then you could sort of see it. Right now, we're living in a world where the time frame reference for us is, 60 seconds equals an hour, but the time frame schedule for galactic and universal phenomenon is, 1 second equals 100 million years. So we're seeing it all kind of frozen in place, moving slowly frame by frame. And you can, if you're an astronomer, you're sort of taking that into account, the time scale difference. So this was the state back in the turn of the century into the 1920s and the 1930s. And in order to explain this impossible conundrum of how come the universe is expanding 27% faster than it should, means that we're missing something. And the first idea that might explain that was the concept of dark energy, put forth by this guy that nobody seems to have ever heard of, this guy Fritz Zwicky. He's a Swiss scientist who first came up with the idea of dark energy and dark matter in order to explain a number of inconsistencies in the math of the standard model of the universe, and how something that might explain its expansion and a bunch of other odd things that don't make sense. Deciphering Dark Matter, The Remarkable Life of Fritz Zwicky, the scientist who pioneered findings on dark matter and supernovae, the outcast genius who unmasked the universe. Sort of funny. It's like there's a lot of characters like this as time has gone on. They're not the ones who win Nobel Prizes. The Nobel Prize was finally won in, I think, 1966 or something, for 3 other scientists for their work on dark energy and dark matter. This guy never got the prize. An unsung hero in the background, like, I guess that could be a description of me, a wacky guy sitting in front of a camera screen with, a few tens of thousands of followers, but no Nobel Prize, or just weird stuff, and strapping on my seatbelt of my brain and exploring the idiosyncrasies of the reality that we live in. So the kind of weird things that were going on at that time, where we have sort of the Big Bang coming out, and what you would normally predict would happen is the distribution of visible matter in the universe would follow this curve if everything went as you would expect it to go, with a Big Bang just expanding. But no, it was expanding like this. Galaxies are spinning a lot faster than expected, expanding a lot faster than we expected. And it was Zwicky who was saying that the difference is due to a gravitational pull from dark matter and an expansion from dark energy. So dark matter creates something called a lensing effect, where you look through a slightly curved lens, and where you think the location of a distant galaxy is through your telescope, it's not actually there, it's skewed off someplace else. The lensing effect is distorting it. And if you had no dark matter there, then it should look like this, but it doesn't look like this. So they know there's something there that's distorting and shifting the image, and they can measure it quite precisely. And the precision of that has gotten better and better with bigger and better telescopes, particularly the James Webb telescope that's happening now. Hubble really pushed the envelope of that, the Hubble telescope. But now we're in a whole different ballgame with the James Webb telescope. It's pretty mind-blowing. So right now, dark energy makes up 68% of the universe. It's invisible. We can't measure it. We can only measure its effects. Dark matter makes up 27%. And everything that we all think is the whole universe is only 5% of the whole business. Pretty crazy. Go back here. So there's this kind of interesting tug of war going on here that between dark matter and regular matter and dark energy. When you look at it, if you just had the Big Bang and an expansion, it should go a certain way, and it doesn't do that. It's expanding faster than it should, and that expansion is driven by dark energy. So dark energy has kind of a positive charge, a sort of a repulsive charge, where it repulses things away from each other and pushes them away from each other. And so all of the matter in the universe is being repelled from all the other matter by dark energy, this invisible force that's pushing them apart faster than it just would be happening from being passive from the explosion of the Big Bang. Dark matter, on the other hand, is the opposite force of that. Dark matter is like gravity. It's pulling things together. It's like dark energy is like the same poles of a magnet pushing each other away, and dark matter is like opposite poles attracting each other together. So the two of those forces are sort of fighting each other. The more rapid expansion of the universe from dark energy is being held back by a certain amount from dark matter pulling against it. So the expansion isn't as big and fast as it would be if dark matter wasn't there as a sort of an invisible gravity factor pulling things back together, and it's sort of a yin-yang thing. But when we go back to our chart here, where you see that dark energy, the force that's pushing matter apart, is 68% and 27% is fighting against it, then the net result is that we have an expansion. And the expansion is more rapid than it would be if the Big Bang had just made everything expand. So once again, dark matter constrains things and dark energy repels things. And so as this model of the universe, where there is a Big Bang, starts expanding things, these two forces make it odd. And it was this oddness of the expansion that was sparking Fritz Zwicky in 1933 to come up with the concept of dark energy and dark matter. The refinement of that came by many scientists over the decades, and a refinement of that whole concept of what that's all about, where dark energy versus dark matter. It's another sort of a big yin-yang thing. But the fight between these two forces, turns out, is a absolutely necessary ingredient for the formations of galaxies and nebulae and star systems. That the fight between those two forces is what coalesced star systems into patterns, into networks, and stars into clouds that would form new stars and would explode and form new elements, and those elements would eventually become life. So from one standpoint, the tension pull between dark energy and dark matter, these hidden forces in the universe, is the stuff of where life itself has come from. Dark matter gives structure to the cosmos. Space is filled with a vast cosmic web, like these web patterns that we sort of are constantly seeing in pictures. Strands, clumps of dark matter which have grown from microscopic variations in the original nearly smooth distribution, dark matter after the Big Bang. Through their gravity, the clumps draw in ordinary matter, so the galaxies form and reside within these clumps. Responding to their own gravity, the clumps and strands also grow denser and more compact. At the same time, dark energy stretches the very fabric of space. So if scientists can study the evolution of the cosmic web, this web here, they ought to be able to see the effects of dark energy setting in and slightly slowing the growth and coalescence of the clumps. This whole configuration that is becoming more and more apparent of these sort of roadways, highways, lines of coalescence of massive sets of star systems that form this branching network, a network that is very familiar to us in other miniature life forms on Earth, as a matter of fact. Dark matter plays the role of creator. Its gravity is pulling sections of the universe to buckle back on itself, forming galaxies along the way. Dark energy, on the other hand, is doing just the opposite. It's fighting the collapse by propelling the universe to expand at an ever faster rate. Luckily for us, dark matter has been winning for most of the cosmic time, particularly in the all-important early stages. Our galaxy, the Milky Way, would have never collapsed out of the expanding rush of the Big Bang without the aid of dark matter's pull. That means no sun, no Earth, no you. Dark matter halos provide gravitational cocoons around galaxies. They capture heavy elements blown out of supernovae, allowing them to fall back in, building ever richer reservoirs of the heavy elements essential for life. That's what I'm talking about, of these invisible yin-yang forces of dark energy and dark matter working behind the scenes to create the conditions where explosions of supernova heavy elements could be formed and coalesced into forms that set the stage for life to begin in organic life forms. And as we said before, the universe wants that to happen because it increases entropy. So with the formations of all the other elements of the periodic table, particularly the basic ones needed for life, form out of supernova explosions and are coalesced with dark matter, and the coalescence is attenuated by dark energy, so it coalesces at just the right speed. Otherwise, it would collapse too fast. Amazing, really. So, in essence, more and more scientists are understanding that dark matter and dark energy, the interaction between those two, is the basis of the origin of life, or organic life as we know it. The formation of the original primordial soup, right? I like this thing. It's like quick and easy directions. Just add dark matter. Cooking times may vary. Multiverses with excess dark energy will fail. A quick meal in just 13.8 billion years. Primordial soup for the purist. everything you need to get life started in your SU3 times SU2 times U to the 1 universe. Gravity, primordial fluctuations, and dark matter sold separately. Ingredients, hydrogen and helium. May contain trace amounts of lithium. Questions or comments, email, well, you might check this out, bullock@uci.aedu. Follow up to 10 to 33 years for refund. But out of all of that is the formation of many worlds of things that have coalesced together and created the perfect atmosphere for organic life as we know it and as we measure it and experience it to exist. So taking into account that life always sort of finds a way, even in the most harsh environments, to manifest itself and live, we can't really measure whether there's life in the universe or not just by basing it on nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon, and a few other elements that we happen to use in this environment to assemble some sort of life form. We have to recognize that life could create many forms, but from what we know about the universe of the periodic table of elements that are the basic building blocks, the universe always chooses the path of least resistance to create things if it can. So that's what we see here in this world. Oxygen and nitrogen and carbon-based system, using iron in your blood to attract oxygen and all of that. All of that is the path of least resistance for this sort of Goldilocks zone of perfect temperature and perfect distance from the sun and perfect elements in the atmosphere. And we really do have a good thing going here. How to build Casimir molecules. So there's this interesting phenomenon where, here we are, certain nanoparticles ought to form stable molecular clusters because the Casimir forces between them repel at short distances but attract at larger distances. So here we've got this sort of miniature dark matter, dark energy thing going on. Casimir molecules. The Casimir effect is when, in a laboratory, when two metal plates that are microscopic are scooted together within a certain distance, then they suck together because the resonant frequencies that exist between them can't get any smaller, and therefore the ones on the outside put pressure and make them snap together. That's part of a larger Casimir effect that is recognized in sort of the esoteric circuits throughout the world, and is one that I see in clinical practice, where I call it the ballpark effect. All you have to do is get within the ballpark and the universe sucks it into place. For instance, in acupuncture, we know that there's acupuncture points all over your body, and that if you put a needle in it, it causes this effect. The point is extremely small, and the needle is very, very small. The possibilities of the average acupuncturist getting that needle dead center in the center of the bullseye every single time, or even once, is pretty slim, unless you had some kind of device that could measure the point and measure the center of that point, to help you guide the needle into the center where the magic happens. No, all this necessary is to get that needle into the zone of influence around that point. And if you hit someplace in the zone of influence, it sucks to the center and creates a response. that's like the ballpark. The center of that zone of influence is home plate, and the ballpark with all the bases is the zone of influence. You see the same thing in just you tune your FM radio or your AM radio or your television when it used to have rabbit ears. you you turn to channel 7, and channel 7 represents a certain frequency that it's looking for in the airwaves. There's no hyper sophisticated mechanism for finding the exact frequency to a couple of decimal points. All you got to do is get within the right ballpark and they suck together. So it's sort of universal sloppiness in a way, that all you need to do is get within the sphere of influence and it sucks to it. So similar to how the antennas in your body, like the pineal gland with quartz resonant crystals, now we've got a crystal radio set, where we can tune into channels in the universe, and all you have to do is get close and it sucks in. This proof of the 0-point energy effect, where these two plates come close enough together and you've got vacuum fluctuations that are going on. Casimir effect is the motion of two parallel plates being caused by quantum fluctuations in a vacuum. Now we know there is no such thing as a vacuum. It's dark matter and dark energy. Plates are extremely close together. Only small fluctuations fit in between. Bigger ones are excluded. The bigger modes exert a total force greater than the smaller modes. Thus, the plates are pushed together. So this is sort of a scientific version of what intuitively you see happen. You get things close enough and they suck together. But they're talking about these quantum fluctuations, and the quantum fluctuations are in various modes of vibration. And as a composer and a musician, modes of vibration are the law of harmonics and overtones. That's what modes are in music. A mode of vibration can be defined as a way of vibrating or a pattern of vibration when applied to a system or a structure that has several points with different amplitudes of deflection. So never mind all those big words. It means that when you're testing a musical instrument, so to speak, like when they do tests of some of the most expensive violins in the world, they'll suspend the violin above a giant speaker, and they'll start running different frequencies, which are called different modes, to see what the sounding boards are tuned to. And the most valuable violins or cellos or anything else out there, the ones that are the very best in the world, they have a flat response to a mode. In other words, the vibration of the sounding board itself has been dampened to a point where when you hit that note on the string, it won't cause the sounding board to sympathetically resonate with that one, because that's the ultimate tuning of the sounding board and would make that note get really louder and the rest of them soft. You want any note that you play to play the same through the sounding board and not have the sounding board go into a sympathetic resonance response and amplify any note or any of its harmonics. That's the sign of a bad violin or bad musical instruments. So this analysis of the modes, of the different vibrational forms of the harmonics and overtones that something might be tuned to, is a thing in acoustic physics. And we see something similar in the Casimir effect with these vibrational modes of quantum fluctuations between two very small things that get sucked together. um, a difference in the energy density on each side of the plate arises from the difference in the number of modes. This results in an attractive force. We're talking about harmonics, the law of music at a subquantum scale, resulting in this sucking together factor. Same thing with music. Certain pieces of music suck you in. They're transformative. Other ones, they don't do that to you. It doesn't hit you right. So these vibrational modes of an ideal string, dividing the string length into integer divisions, producing harmonics and overtones, where the fundamental frequency is the open string, you divide it exactly in half, and each of these two strings is 1 octave higher than this. So if this open string was 400 hertz, these would both be 800. And then 1/3 of the open string, 1/4 of the open string, now we've got harmonics. Those are called modes, vibrational modes. And as we see those vibrational modes in the Casimir effect forming molecules, we now have molecules forming out of the modes and forming things like DNA in particular is where we're going with this. Once you get molecules of a certain type of molecules forming, and the Casimir effect is sucking things together and clumping things together, and dark energy and dark matter are working on that at a subquantum field level, we have the formation of patterns that are already inherent in the universe as a sort of a universal idea that everything in the universe is attempting to conform to, that we see expressed larger and smaller in a continuum where everything reflects each other at different scales and different time speeds and different size scales. So if we go back to what we saw before, where the energy distribution in the universe of dark energy at 68% and dark matter at 27%, and the 5% is everything we see in the visible world with our 5 senses. The first thing when I saw that was, that reminds me of something that I've seen before, and that's the default mode network. Exactly the same. When they discovered the default mode network in 2001 using fMRI device, they discovered the slowest brain frequency ever measured at that time. 1 brain pulse every 10 to 20 seconds. That's very slow. The slowest brainwave frequency up to that point that was recognized was low delta at 0.5 hertz, 1 brain pulse every 2 seconds. Delta at 1 hertz is 1 pulse every second, 1 hertz, cycles per second. So half of that would be 1 brain pulse every 2 seconds. That was the slowest that has been recognized for 70, 75 years. Even when I went to school, that's what we learned. Then I broke through that in 1989 with an EEG machine in my patients in a 2-year study where I saw below delta brain activity. I saw brain frequencies going slower than 1 pulse every 2 seconds. That blew my mind because they told us there was no basement in this house, and I just discovered one. Associated with precognitive and out-of-the-body experiences and psychic things. I called it Epsilon. And we did double-blind studies with that, which were pretty astounding. And then they discovered the default mode network, which was below the epsilon. So the epsilon was 1 brain pulse every 2 to 4 seconds, and I had epsilon 2 as one brain pulse every 4 to 8 seconds. And I was wondering if there was an epsilon 3, and that turned out to be the default mode network at one pulse every 10 seconds to 20 seconds. And then that extrapolated out to, I wonder if there's anything slower than that. So I called that iota, and we did a program on iota. I produced a CD, a soundtrack on iota. But the default mode network of these 4 zones in the brain that are tightly synchronized together in this extremely slow brain pulse of one brain pulse every 10 to 20 seconds. As more and more research institutes jumped on the bandwagon to find out what all this meant, it quickly became apparent that the default mode network represented the default mode function of the brain. 95% of all brain function is the default mode function under the hood, and only 5% off the top is everything that we see here and everything we process here in our cognitive consciousness state that we think is the whole thing, and this is only just 5% off the top. Does that sound familiar? 95% under the hood is invisible, and 5% off the top is everything we see. That's exactly what they're talking about with dark matter, dark energy versus the visible universe. The visible universe is just 5% off the top, and under the hood is 95% that's invisible that you can't measure. There's a direct correlation there. There are no sort of accidents or coincidence with a capital C is what I call it. We see the default mode network function, the basic under the hood functioning of the brain that is under our conscious awareness level. Down there crunching numbers and doing things, they call it mind wandering, where the brain is in a non-focused, highly synchronized state. Further research in the default mode network showed that this is where we get our sense of self. The frontal zone, precuneus zone at the front, is where we get our sense of self on the inside of our skin. And the occipital zone is where we get our sense of self on the outside of our skin, the universe at large. And when we synchronize those two together, we get our normal sense of where we are in space. My inside of my body, me versus what's outside of me, is the synchronizing of these two. Sense of time is these two, the temporal parietal zones. All my memories of the past to the last instant projected into the future and anticipating where this is logically going to go next. Synchronizing those two together give me my central sense of me here now. My sense of the present is a juxtaposition of memories from the past meeting anticipations into the future, fused together, synchronized as a working plan to give me a sense of myself in time. And me sensing what's inside of me versus what's outside of me, synchronizing those two together, giving my sense of where I am in space. So my total sense of self in time and space is the function of the default mode network. So when we see any evidence of these 4 zones becoming unsynchronized, the very first neuropathology that comes from that would be dissociative disorders, schizophrenia, psychiatric disorders. We also see that in autism. A sense of self is a bit dissolved. But ultimately, the research that came through that I saw in my news feeds as the years went by is it's now recognized that every major neurological condition that you could find or name has a disintegration of the synchronicity of the four zones of the default mode network as its major substrate functional imbalance. And so using brainwave entrainment to the default mode network to resynchronize that, because that's what happens with binaural beats. If we have headphones on, it forces synchronicity. That means that we now have a tool to solve this problem of asynchronizing of the four zones of the default mode network with all these neurological conditions that spin from that by simply using headphones and binaural beats set to the default mode network speed. We can fix those problems. Later, because I was making these soundtracks and using them with patients and listening to them myself and thinking to myself, I don't have schizophrenia and I don't have neurological conditions. I'm fairly normal. So what does it mean if I take a fairly normal synchronized state of the four zones and I hyper-synchronize them together with a headphone track that makes them more synchronized? And just at that period of time, the news feeds came through. That state of hyper-synchronizing of the four zones is associated with extreme expanded states of consciousness. They're calling it cosmic consciousness experiences. So if you think about it for a minute, if I was to hyper-synchronize my sense of self in space, my sense of where I am on the inside of my body versus the outside, and hyper-synchronize that up together, the boundary of my body versus the outside world begins to get funky, begins to get indistinct. So it becomes more and more difficult for me to tell where the inside of my body ends against the outside world. And pretty soon my perception is the entire outside world of the whole universe is inside my skin. That's cosmic consciousness experience. Same thing with time. We begin to hyper-synchronize up my time sense, and all past and future events get folded into the present moment so that all becomes indistinct, that my present extends into all past and future events. It becomes an eternal present where all past and future events are enfolded there for me to witness and see. All because this 5% off the top is what world appears to be, but 95% under the hood is what I kind of think of as the quantum reality generator. But when I look at the patterns of how these things tend to work, the universe tends to always have a fractal sort of holographic repetitive theme at all kinds of different time scales and different size scales. Everything reflects the same rules that everything else is working by. That what you see at an atomic level is extended into the macro world. That everything seems to be based on a fractal geometry, where once you see the basic pattern at any scale, you can pretty much be sure that that pattern is going to show up in any other scale you look at sooner or later. And whenever I've seen those kind of patterns and extrapolated it out, I've never been wrong. That's how come I've been making these predictions 20 years before anybody discovers them, because I'm looking at the patterns. When I broke through and discovered epsilon, I already had seen a pattern. I'm going, okay, whatever I was taught in school, I don't have to believe that anymore. It means that who knows how deep this goes? I mean, how many brain frequencies slower and slower and slower can we find? And how many brain frequencies faster and faster than beta can we find that they tell us don't exist? And then they discovered gamma at 40 hertz above beta. that proved the rule of something I predicted back in 1989. And then they discovered 100 and 200. Again, it's the same pattern over and over again. Then they discovered slower than epsilon. So I extrapolate that and say, I bet you there's something slower than that, iota. So I won't be surprised when they discover higher than 200 hertz and slower than, one brain pulse every 80 seconds, which is epsilon, which is iota 2. But back here, when I see this pattern that 5% is the visible universe and 95% is the invisible universe, and the 95% is further divided into dark matter and dark energy, where there's a percentage ratio there of 68%, 27%. Where my mind goes immediately is that this is probably also true of the default mode network function of the brain. That what is currently looked upon as the default mode network, I believe probably has two parts that are similar to what we see here. That the default mode network, the 95% of the default mode network is probably also divided into 68%, 28%, 27%, and they just haven't found that yet. That there's a dark energy and a dark matter under the hood in the default mode functioning of my brain itself at a quantum level. So don't be surprised when you see that in the news in 20 years. And it's not just me. It looks like many scientists have been thinking the same thing. Dark energy inside the brain. The issue perhaps could be resolved if we begin with a series of assumptions. The first assumption is that visible energy of the human brain gets converted into dark energy during its cognitive activities. Brain's processing of signal into information, developing it into knowledge, transforming knowledge into experience, and sublimation of knowledge into wisdom. Dark energy is not any black energy. It's invisible energy. It has been presumed that there is a dark energy in the brain, as in the universe. This comes as a prediction from authors' theory that when information splits into space, time, and energy, delivery of this energy happens from dark energy domain. Energy released, however, is visible energy, although this release happens in very small blah, blah, blah. It's the overriding theme here is that I'm not the only one that's thinking about this. And the blessing for me of doing these live streams is that I have put myself in a position to force me to do what I love to do anyway, which is learn, explore, find out new stuff that blows my mind, and share it with those of like mind. And this was no exception. A news feed came across that had to do with dark energy that started me off and rolling, and I decided to do this one on dark energy and dark matter. And then I went on exploration to find out everything I could find out about it. I had basic ideas, but I knew that I didn't know the detailed ideas about what's out there. And once I went on that journey, it just blew my mind. And so thank all of you for helping to whip my button gear to go on these cool exploration journeys. Dark matter and consciousness energy as elementary particles in the unified field of quantum reality. That once again we see the default mode split into dark energy, dark matter. That's a fractal reflection of what's going on in the quantum field and the macro field of the universe at large, where we see the same laws applied in various size dimensions and various scales. Here's a PubMed article, A Unifying Theory of Physics and Biological Information Through Consciousness. And as this article continues to move, they're talking about the same kind of thing of dark energy, dark matter, default mode network, archives in neurology and neuroscience, zero-point energy state of the brain. Now we're getting somewhere. Zero-point energy state of the brain has been chosen as the central issue which could make a platform for addressing the leading-edge ideas in cognitive neuroscience and cell biology, physics and cosmology, to initiate multidisciplinary research with a view to expanding the horizon of present science. Zero-point energy state of the brain has been considered as the most comfortable and restful state of the brain. Zero state energy of the brain, most restful and comfortable state of the brain, full of activities like healing, regeneration, when the brain might remain potentially open for further cognitive evolution. Dark energy, visible energy, homeostasis between dark energy and visible energy within the brain cells has been conceptually linked with the gymnastics and cognitive activities. So this immediately got my attention because this concept of the 0 point is really the foundation of the work that I've been doing for 40 years with biotuning, with the use of sound to cause an effect in the autonomic nervous system to bring a state of homeostasis, zero stress in the system, or putting the brain into its 0 point. And that's pretty much indeed what this is all about. This is the patented HRV screen that I use. It's live. It's a live HRV where modern medical system uses a snapshot. I use live. It's like an fMRI for HRV. Blue is sympathetic, green is parasympathetic, and this is the 0 point right here. This is the zero balance point of homeostasis between these two, where I feel safe. And my sympathetic is not on drawing energy out of my reservoir for a purpose of fighting for my life. And the parasympathetic is not on drawing energy from the reservoir to digest my food and eliminate toxins. That when neither of these processes is happening or on, they're both off, and I'm at the 0 rest point of homeostasis. The 0 stress point of homeostasis in physiology is the key to healing. It's the prerequisite for being able to heal. So as I've explained in the past, but more than 2 years ago with the old broadcasts, I did a large segment on biotuning and what I'm doing with this heart rate variability thing. But the concept underlying it all is that the autonomic nervous system is the automatic system that tells all systems what to do. It's the internal physician program. But the internal physician program can only work when the reservoir is full and that energy is not being used for any other purpose, like fighting for my life with the sympathetic or digesting my food with the parasympathetic. So if I'm not doing either one of those two activities, then I'm at the 0 point. 0 stress, homeostasis of these two. The reservoir is now full, and now the situation is perfect for the internal physician program to come online and use that energy to balance all of my organs and glands and biochemistry and body systems and meridians and chakras and emotions. All of those are managed by this central command, which is receiving signals from all of those and making spot decisions to send signals back down to balance them all out, harmonize them, synchronize them, make them work at top efficiency so I'm the maximum healthy that I can be. That's the perfect state of health, is this 0 point where all the energy is in my reservoir, 0 point of stress. And now we're for people who are sick, where we have disease, this is the ultimate state of ease. So anything other than this is disease. That's abnormal. There's a normal function of stress that turns on and off, normal function of digestion that turns on and off. But anything that is beyond that, where stress is locked in and it can't move, or the stress handling system is blown and all this less of the parasympathetic, like in PTSD, then our therapeutic approach to that is there is a precisely tuned sound frequency that will reset the 0 point. And when we play that frequency, we can see it on the HRV. That brings it right back. And so now if we train it in a gym with a series of soundtracks that you listen to with headphones at home, and then come into the office where you have it delivered into your body through a sound chair with headphones, with binaural beats, that pretty much resets under the hood internal position program, and whatever condition you've got responds well. But the confirmation of that, to see that here with the 0 point energy state in peer-reviewed journals of neurology and neuroscience, where they're talking about the 0 point energy state and homeostasis and the most comfortable and restful brain, and now they're linking that to dark energy, and that there's a 0 point between dark energy and visible energy, and dark matter and visible matter, that these deeper principles that we know were deeply associated with the default mode function of the brain, which is the automatic function deeply connected with the autonomic nervous system, and the 0 point, all of this together is the prerequisite for reaching the highest states of consciousness that you can achieve. That various things have to be in place as the foundation for stepping off into these other etheric realms of consciousness, that if they're not aligned, they hold you back. You can't completely go into etheric realms with freedom when you've got cement boots on of imbalances in the physical realm or the emotional realm or the mental realm. Those things have to be cleared. Now when you're clear at a 0 point, you can step forward into higher states of consciousness with nothing holding you back. Universe may be conscious, say prominent scientists. May be conscious? Come on, give me a break. A proto-consciousness field theory could replace the theory of dark matter, one physicist states. Well, this is just some scientists poking a stick at an idea that the rest of us have known about for 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years. All of this stuff is in the Sutras of Patanjali, 4,000 years. Is it possible that dark energy is consciousness, and that our collective consciousness makes up the fabric of the universe? And not only is it possible, but that is the state of things as far as I'm concerned, proved by quantum physics and proved and discussed at length in the ancient texts on the planet. All talk about that. The collective unconsciousness is, at the root of the quantum field. You break particles apart and there's smaller particles, but you break those apart and there's smaller particles, and the smallest particle, you break it open, there's nothing inside except energy pattern relationships forming standing waves, modes of vibration. And from the ancient texts, and that's unmeasurable and invisible. In the ancient texts, what is that? The substrate of all of it, that's consciousness itself, living through an idea, having a dream. This is the dream. This is the idea. And then is interacting with its dream and co-creating that dream, massaging the dream, refining the dream, That's what we're up to with mind links, to connect to the quantum field with consciousness and manipulate the quantum field for a better outcome than what we have. It's malleable. The universe is malleable. This physicist says consciousness could be a new state of matter. Consciousness isn't something scientists like to talk about. You can't see it, you can't touch it, and despite the best efforts of certain researchers, you can't quantify it. And in science, if you can't measure something, you're going to have a tough time explaining it. So, yeah. From the ancient traditions and from E equals mc squared, E equals m. Energy equals matter. And that means that consciousness is the most refined form of matter, and matter is the most condensed form of consciousness. So this statement is sort of ridiculous to those of us who are steeped in esoterica. You know, consciousness could be a new state of matter. Consciousness is the most refined form of matter. Matter is the most condensed form of consciousness. Dark matter is cosmic mycelium. So for those of you who don't understand mycelium, we'll get into it. The hypothesis here is that dark matter, like mycelium, is the information superhighway of the universe, the endless interconnected web within which all information travels faster than the speed of light. Because it travels faster than the speed of light, time is unfolded, or a priori, and exists before we can perceive it. So mycelium, this is a picture of mycelium in the background here. It's the network of this fungi that exists in the soil, connected to all the tree roots. So really, when you look at a forest, all these trees are one massive, gigantic organism. The entire forest is a giant organism, connected through its roots by mycelium, which sends signals back and forth where these trees communicate with each other. If one tree gets attacked by some kind of pest, the other trees will send nutrients to that tree to help it. It's the same thing. Mycelium looks like these cosmic webs that we're talking about. It's the same sort of fractal mirrored reflection that we see everywhere, where we see in brain networks the same way. Neurons in brain networks look a lot like the networks we see in the sky, in the cosmos, which looks the same as these mycelium networks that form, under the ground that connect living things together, where dark matter is cosmic mycelium. It's the same kind of idea. Scientists say the human brain resembles the cosmos. Yep, there we go. Same stuff. Research paper, Quantum Transport in Fractal Networks. Quantum transport in fractal networks in scales of size and dimension and speed explores the possibility that the brain and the cosmos are connected through fractal networks. The fact that they're using the same mathematical laws that reflect and connect themselves together. Fractals are self-replicating patterns that can be found in various scales, both in nature and the universe. This study investigates the quantum transport properties of fractals, specifically focusing on how electrons and energy move through these networks. Scientists discover possible connection between human brain and the cosmos on a quantum scale. Wow. All of it hyper connected together on every scale imaginable. Time, space, quantum fields, macro universe. And what stands dead center in between all of those is our brain. Frontiers of Neuroscience is a major magazine. The quantitative comparison between the neuronal network and the cosmic web. Wow. harmonizing the cosmos and consciousness, profound parallels between the universe and the human brain. Cosmic web, cerebellum, brain cortex, and they're so similar mathematically that there are scientists linking this stuff together and realizing once they're similar enough, we have the Casimir effect where they suck together. All you need to do is get similarities within the same ballpark, and the information processing sucks together between them. Sort of a universal cosmic fractal that penetrates from the outermost reaches of the macro universe through the intermediary of the human brain directly into the core of the quantum field. All of it fractalized communication networks that astoundingly resemble each other. Decoding the geometry of the mind, an exploration of universal geometric recognition. There's something that is deeply recognizable here of universal patterns in nature, deeply recognizable to the deep unconscious mind that is here in the center of it all. Where the 0 point would be where all of these coalesce together and consciousness recognizes the pattern. And that opens the door. Evidences of the fractal universe, the mini cosmos inside the brain. All of it hyperlinked together. All you need to do is to find your 0 point in your consciousness where all of those things link together at the same spot. And it's my belief that that's what accomplished high-level meditators have been able to do, and that we can do with science and technology and entrainment, binaural beats, with the foundation of the 0 point in the autonomic nervous system, so my stress is zeroed out. I feel safe. I feel safe enough to open up all my doors and windows to explore whatever's there fearlessly. That is the prerequisite for the highest states of consciousness that we can imagine. All of that, all of the fancy schmancy math and the fractals and the universe and all the rest of it, and the formation of life itself, all of it ends up in something tender and vulnerable and alive and resilient and very difficult to kill. Life always finds a way. But ultimately, with the magnificent, the grandiose universe itself penetrating into the unfathomable reaches of the smallest of the smallest of the small in the quantum field, all of it finally ends up with one thing, which is something of the heart, something of the emotions, something that's delicate and tender and alive, something that needs to be cherished and protected. That's really what this is all about. Who do you love and who loves you back? And if your love can extend and your consciousness can expand it into all the things that are alive in the whole universe, that to me is the real idea of cosmic consciousness, that the whole universe is alive and the whole universe is attempting to expand itself out and achieve new forms of expression of life. And with that, let's have our headphones. Today we're doing Lambda, which is the highest brain frequency so far. This been measured, 200 hertz. Actually, it's not true. There now have been new research reports in the last month of up to 2,500 cycles per second brain activity. But right now, 200 is the one that's been around since the discovery of gamma in the late 80s. 40 hertz, 100, and 200. Lambda is the most rapid one that I have a soundtrack of. So that's what we're doing today. And here we go. Mhm. So thank you all for being here with me. Um, there is always the possibility, if there are any questions or comments or anything that you need to continue with after this live stream, you can contact us through our main website. That's the Sky Collective website, the contact us information there. You can, I see that people are still maybe talking on the forum, so I'm going to leave this going for a little bit. Something many of you may not know is that even though I retired from clinical practice, I still have a up and thriving medical consultation business. If any of you have health problems or just want to talk with me about sort of anything, you can schedule those appointments through scientificsounds.com website. At the top, click the button called consultations, and you can set that up with a calendar. Thank you all very much. Glory and peace and joy and happiness to all of you, and health until I see you the next time.